The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen adjusted his gear for another day of instruction. He had been teaching marksmanship for 3 years now, and thought he had seen every type of recruit that walked through those gates. Some came cocky, others nervous, but all of them carried the same look of uncertainty when they first held a rifle. That Tuesday started like any other. Marcus checked his equipment, reviewed the day's training schedule, and prepared to meet the new batch of recruits. The group was smaller than usual, just 12 soldiers who needed advanced shooting certification. As he walked toward the outdoor range, he noticed someone had already arrived early. A woman sat quietly on a bench near the shooting stations, her rifle resting against her leg. She wasn't cleaning it or checking the scope like most eager recruits did. Instead, she simply sat there, staring out at the distant targets with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Her posture was relaxed but alert, like a cat watching birds from a windowsill. Marcus walked past her without saying anything. It wasn't unusual for recruits to arrive early, especially the nervous ones who wanted extra time to prepare. He had learned not to single out individuals before the official training began. It often made them more anxious than they already were, but something made him stop. Maybe it was the way she held herself, or the fact that her rifle looked different from the standard-issue weapons the other recruits carried. He turned around and took a closer look. The weapon was clearly customized with modifications that spoke of serious experience and significant investment. "That's an interesting setup you have there," Marcus said, walking back toward her. She looked up at him with calm, dark eyes. "Thank you, Sergeant. I hope it meets the requirements for today's training." There was something in her voice that caught his attention. No nervousness, no attempt to impress him, just a simple statement of fact. Most recruits either tried too hard to show their knowledge or admitted they knew nothing. She did neither. "I'm Marcus Chen. I'll be your instructor today." He extended his hand. "Elena Rodriguez," she replied, shaking his hand with a firm grip. "I appreciate you taking the time to work with us." Marcus noticed her hands. They were steady, with calluses in exactly the places you'd expect from someone who spent serious time with firearms. But again, she wasn't showing off or trying to prove anything. She just answered his questions directly and waited for instructions. As the other recruits arrived, Marcus began his standard introduction. He explained the day's objectives, safety procedures, and what he expected from each participant. Elena listened attentively but didn't ask questions like some of the others did. "Before we begin shooting, I want to see where everyone stands," Marcus announced. "We'll start with some basic accuracy tests at 100 meters. Nothing fancy, just 10 shots to see your current skill level." The recruits lined up at their assigned stations. Marcus walked behind them, observing their stance, grip, and breathing techniques. Most of them showed the typical signs of intermediate shooters trying to remember everything they had learned in basic training. Elena took her position at Station 7. Marcus watched as she settled into her shooting stance with fluid, practiced movements. There was no hesitation, no adjustment period. She simply became still and focused in a way that reminded him of the advanced snipers he had trained with in special operations. "Begin when ready," Marcus called out. The range filled with the sounds of rifle fire as the recruits took their shots. Some fired quickly, others took long pauses between shots. Marcus made mental notes about each person's technique and obvious areas for improvement. Elena's shots came at steady intervals, neither rushed nor overly cautious. Each shot was followed by a brief pause, then another shot with the same rhythm. Marcus found himself paying more attention to her than the others, though he couldn't quite explain why. When everyone finished, Marcus called for a ceasefire and walked down to check the targets. Most of the results were what he expected. Decent groupings with room for improvement, a few flyers that indicated basic technique issues, and generally the kind of shooting you'd see from soldiers with standard training. Then he reached Elena's target. Marcus stopped walking and stared at the paper. All 10 shots had hit within a circle smaller than his fist. It wasn't just good shooting, it was exceptional shooting, the kind of precision that usually took years of dedicated practice to achieve. He looked back at Elena, who was calmly cleaning her rifle while the other recruits chatted nervously about their performance. She wasn't checking her target or waiting anxiously for feedback like the others. She simply went through her post-shooting routine as if this were just another day at the office. "Rodriguez, can you come here for a moment?" Marcus called out. She walked over to where he stood beside her target. Marcus pointed at the tight grouping of holes in the paper. "How long have you been shooting?" he asked. "Since I was 12, Sergeant. My father taught me." "And how often do you practice?" "As often as I can. Usually several times a week when I'm not deployed." Marcus nodded slowly. The word deployed explained some things but raised other questions. "What's your specialty in the service?" "Infantry officially, but I've done some additional training." She wasn't being evasive exactly, but Marcus sensed there was more to the story. Additional training could mean anything from advanced marksmanship courses to specialized military schools that most people had never heard of. "Well, you're clearly beyond the basic level of this course," Marcus said. "But since you're here, maybe you can help me demonstrate some techniques for the others." Elena nodded. "Of course, Sergeant. Whatever you need." As they walked back to the group, Marcus found himself curious about this quiet woman who shot like a professional sniper but spoke like any other soldier. He had a feeling this was going to be a more interesting day than he had expected. The other recruits looked at Elena's target with a mixture of admiration and intimidation. Marcus used it as a teaching moment, explaining the fundamentals that produced such consistent accuracy. But in the back of his mind, he was already wondering what other surprises Elena Rodriguez might have in store. What Marcus didn't know was that Elena's additional training had taken her to some of the most dangerous places in the world, where the difference between hitting and missing a target could mean the difference between life and death for entire units of soldiers. Her quiet confidence wasn't just the result of good training. It was the product of experience that few people could imagine and even fewer could handle. After lunch, Marcus decided to increase the difficulty of the training. The morning's basic accuracy tests had revealed the skill levels of his recruits, but he wanted to challenge them with more realistic scenarios. He had noticed that several of them, including Elena, were capable of more advanced work. "This afternoon we're moving to 300 meters, Marcus announced as the group reassembled at the range. "We'll also be adding some time pressure and stress factors to simulate real combat conditions." Some of the recruits looked nervous at the mention of increased distance and pressure. 300 meters was significantly more challenging than the morning's work, requiring better understanding of wind, bullet drop, and environmental factors. Marcus set up a series of exercises that would test not just accuracy, but also the ability to acquire targets quickly and shoot under pressure. The first exercise involved hitting multiple targets in sequence within a set time limit. The second would require shooting from different positions, including prone, sitting, and standing. "Who wants to demonstrate the first exercise?" Marcus asked. Several hands went up, but Elena wasn't among them. She stood quietly with the rest of the group, paying attention but not pushing herself forward. Marcus had noticed this pattern throughout the morning. Despite her obvious skill, she seemed content to let others take the spotlight. "Rodriguez, why don't you show us how it's done?" Marcus said. Elena stepped forward without hesitation. She examined the targets through her scope, checking the wind flags and making mental calculations. Marcus watched her process, noting how systematically she approached each element of the shot. "Ready when you are," Marcus called out, starting his stopwatch. Elena moved through the exercise with smooth efficiency. She engaged 5 targets at 300 meters in less than 2 minutes, hitting each one cleanly. But what impressed Marcus most wasn't the speed or accuracy, though both were excellent. It was the calmness she maintained throughout the entire sequence. While other shooters might rush between targets or let adrenaline affect their breathing, Elena moved with the same steady rhythm she had shown during the morning session. Each shot was deliberate and controlled, as if she had all the time in the world. When she finished, Marcus checked the targets while the other recruits watched. All 5 hits were center mass, with groupings that would have been impressive at half the distance. "Outstanding work," Marcus said, though he was beginning to suspect that 300 meters was well within Elena's comfort zone. "Let's see how everyone else does." The other recruits took their turns with varying degrees of success. Most managed to hit the targets, but their groupings were much larger, and their times significantly slower. A few missed entirely, which was understandable given the increased difficulty. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus introduced more challenging scenarios. Moving targets, shooting from cover, engaging multiple targets at different distances. Elena handled each exercise with the same quiet competence she had shown all day. During a break between exercises, Marcus approached her privately. "Elena, I have to ask, what kind of additional training have you had?" She was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider how much to reveal. I've been through several advanced schools, Sergeant. Scout Sniper course, some specialized programs. Scout Sniper? Marcus raised an eyebrows. That explained a lot. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper program was one of the most demanding military training courses in existence. Only a small percentage of candidates successfully completed it, and even fewer were women. How did you qualify for that program? I was recommended by my commanding officer after a deployment in Afghanistan. There was a need for snipers with my particular skill set. Marcus was beginning to understand that Elena's understated way of describing her experience probably hid a much more impressive reality. Military people often downplayed their achievements, but scout snipers were in a different category entirely. What's the longest shot you've made in training? Marcus asked. Elena hesitated again. Officially or unofficially? The way she asked the question made Marcus realize he might be getting into classified territory. Let's stick with what you can tell me. During the final test of Scout Sniper School, we had to hit targets out to 1,000 meters. I qualified at that distance, Marcus nodded. 1,000 meters was serious long-range shooting, requiring advanced understanding of ballistics, weather conditions, and equipment capabilities. But something in Elena's tone suggested there was more to the story. And unofficially? He asked carefully. Elena looked around to make sure none of the other recruits were listening, then spoke quietly. I've made successful shots at distances beyond what we typically train for in standard courses. She didn't give specifics, but Marcus could read between the lines. Snipers who talked about distances beyond what we typically train for were usually referring to extremely long-range shots, the kind that made headlines when they happened in combat. How far beyond? Marcus pressed gently. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Marcus thought she might not answer, but then she spoke in an even lower voice. My record is 3,200 meters. Marcus felt his jaw drop slightly. 3,200 meters was over 2 miles. It was the kind of shooting that required not just exceptional skill, but also perfect equipment, ideal conditions, and an incredible understanding of advanced ballistics. Are you serious? Marcus asked. Dead serious, Elena replied. And something in her eyes told Marcus she meant it literally. 3,200 meters was in the realm of record-breaking shots. Only a handful of snipers in the world had made confirmed kills at that distance, and it required years of specialized training and experience. Where did this happen? I can't give you specifics about the location or circumstances, Sergeant, but it was a confirmed hit during a combat operation. Marcus stared at her for a moment, trying to process what he had just learned. He was standing next to someone who had made one of the longest sniper shots in military history, and she was taking a basic marksmanship refresher course like any other soldier. Elena, with respect, what are you doing in this class? She smiled slightly, the first time Marcus had seen any real emotion from her all day. Every sniper needs to maintain proficiency at all ranges, Sergeant. Besides, I enjoy shooting with other people. Most of my work is done alone. The weight of that last statement wasn't lost on Marcus. Snipers, especially those working at extreme ranges, often operated in isolation for extended periods. The psychological demands of that kind of work were as challenging as the physical skills required. Well, Marcus said, still trying to wrap his head around Elena's background, I think we might need to adjust the afternoon's training program. Please don't change anything on my account, Elena said quickly. I'm here to help however I can, but I don't want special treatment. Marcus looked at her with new understanding. She wasn't trying to show off or prove anything. She was simply a professional doing her job, regardless of how extraordinary her capabilities might be. It was probably that attitude that had enabled her to achieve such remarkable success in one of the military's most demanding fields. As they rejoined the group, Marcus found himself looking at the entire training session differently. He was no longer just teaching basic marksmanship. He had the opportunity to learn from someone whose experience went far beyond anything he had encountered in his own career. That evening, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with Elena. A 3,200-meter shot was extraordinary by any standard, and he found himself curious about the circumstances that had led to such an extreme engagement. After the other recruits had left for the day, he noticed Elena was still at the range, methodically cleaning her rifle. Mind if I join you? Marcus asked, taking a seat on the bench beside her. Of course not. Sergeant. Elena continued her cleaning routine with the same precise movements she applied to everything else. I keep thinking about what you told me earlier, Marcus said. That's an incredible achievement even by sniper standards. Elena paused in her work and looked out at the distant targets. It wasn't about achievement, Sergeant. It was about saving lives. Something in her tone made Marcus realize he was about to hear a story that few people had been told. Elena seemed to be deciding whether to continue, weighing her words carefully. Can you tell me about it? Marcus asked gently. Elena resumed cleaning her rifle but began speaking in a quiet voice. This was 3 years ago in Afghanistan. We had a forward operating base in a valley surrounded by mountains. The terrain was perfect for long-range observation, but it also meant we were vulnerable to enemy snipers positioned on the high ground. She paused to check the rifle's action, then continued. Intelligence indicated that a high-value target was planning to meet with local commanders at a compound about 3 kilometers from our position. The meeting was supposed to finalize plans for a major attack on coalition forces. Marcus listened intently, understanding that Elena was sharing something significant. Combat stories, especially those involving successful sniper operations, weren't discussed lightly. The problem was the distance and the location, Elena continued. The compound was positioned on a plateau that gave it excellent protection from conventional airstrikes or ground assault. The only approach that offered a clear line of sight was from our base, but that meant shooting across an entire valley. 3.2 kilometers, Marcus said. Exactly, beyond the normal range for most sniper systems, and definitely beyond what anyone expected would be necessary, but our intelligence was solid. This target had been responsible for planning attacks that killed dozens of coalition soldiers and hundreds of civilians. Elena set down her cleaning rod and looked directly at Marcus. My commanding officer asked if I thought it was possible. Not if I was willing to try, but if it was actually possible. What did you tell him? I told him I'd need time to study the conditions and run calculations. A shot like that isn't just about marksmanship. You have to account for air density, temperature variations across the distance, wind patterns at different altitudes, even the rotation of the Earth. Marcus shook his head in amazement. Most people don't realize that long-range shooting is as much science as it is art. I spent 2 days gathering data, Elena continued. Weather patterns, wind measurements at different elevations, temperature readings throughout the day. I had to calculate bullet drop, flight time, and drift. At that distance, the bullet would be in the air for almost 7 seconds. She picked up her rifle and sighted down the barrel toward the distant mountains. 7 seconds is an eternity in combat. Anything can change. The target can move, the wind can shift, your own position can be compromised. How did you prepare for the shot? Practice, mostly. I set up targets at the maximum range available and worked on consistency. But you can't really practice for 200 meters unless you have 200 meters available, which we didn't. Elena lowered her rifle and continued her story. The day of the operation, I was in position before dawn. The shot window was narrow, maybe 30 minutes when the light and wind conditions would be optimal. Were you alone? I had a spotter with me, Corporal Davies. Good soldier, experienced with long-range work, but even he thought the shot was borderline impossible. Marcus could imagine the pressure both Elena and her spotter must have felt. Making a shot at that distance under combat conditions, with lives depending on success, was the kind of situation that could define or destroy a sniper's career. The target appeared right on schedule, Elena continued. Through the scope, he looked like a tiny figure, barely distinguishable from the others around him. At that distance, you're not really aiming at a person. You're aiming at a mathematical point in space where you calculate the person will be when the bullet arrives. How did you handle the pressure? Elena was quiet for a moment. You don't think about the pressure. You think about the process. Breathing, trigger control, follow through. All the fundamentals you've practiced thousands of times. The distance doesn't change the basics. But it was still an extraordinary shot. It was a necessary shot, Elena corrected. Davies gave me the range and wind call. I made my adjustments and waited for the right moment. When everything aligned, I took the shot. Marcus leaned forward. What happened? 7 seconds later, the target went down. Clean hit, center mass. The meeting dispersed immediately, and intelligence later confirmed that we had eliminated not just the primary target, but disrupted the entire attack plan. Elena finished reassembling her rifle and stood up. The operation saved lives, both military and civilian. That's what mattered. Did you realize at the time that you had just made one of the longest sniper shots in military history? I realized I had done my job, Elena replied simply. The distance was just a number. The mission was what counted. Marcus watched her pack her equipment with the same methodical precision she had shown all day. Is that why you're so calm about it? Because you see it as just doing your job? Elena shouldered her rifle case and looked at Marcus. Sergeant, every sniper faces situations where the shot matters more than anything else in the world at that moment. Distance, difficulty, conditions. None of that changes the fundamental responsibility. You take the shot because someone's life depends on it. As they walked toward the parking area, Marcus reflected on what he had learned. Elena Rodriguez wasn't just an exceptional marksman. She was someone who had faced an almost impossible challenge under extreme pressure, and succeeded because she understood that her skills existed to serve something larger than herself. Elena, thank you for sharing that story with me. Thank you for listening, Sergeant. It's not something I talk about often. I can understand why. That level of shooting is beyond what most people can comprehend. Elena stopped and turned to face him. That's exactly why I don't usually discuss it. People focus on the distance and miss the point. The point is that training, preparation, and dedication matter. When the moment comes that tests everything you've learned, you have to be ready. As Marcus drove home that night, he couldn't stop thinking about Elena's perspective. She had achieved something remarkable, but she saw it simply as meeting the requirements of her profession. It was a level of humility and focus that explained how someone could develop the skills necessary for such extraordinary performance. The next morning brought perfect shooting conditions to the range. The air was still, visibility was crystal clear, and the temperature was steady. Marcus arrived early to set up for the day's advanced training, but his mind was still processing everything Elena had told him the night before. As he arranged equipment and checked targets, an idea began forming. The standard training facility had targets out to 600 meters, but Marcus knew there were extended ranges available on the backside of the military reservation that could accommodate much longer shots. If Elena was truly capable of the precision she had demonstrated in combat, perhaps this was an opportunity to witness something extraordinary. When Elena arrived, Marcus approached her with his proposal. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, he said. We have access to an extended range facility that goes out to 1,500 meters. Would you be interested in doing some long-range demonstration shooting for the group? Elena considered the request carefully. What would be the purpose of the demonstration, Sergeant? Education, primarily. Most of these soldiers have never seen precision shooting at extended ranges. It could be valuable for them to understand what's possible with proper training and equipment. And you want me to shoot at 1,500 meters? Only if you're comfortable with it. I know it's well within your capabilities. Elena nodded slowly. I'd be willing to do that, but I'll need time to study the conditions and set up properly. Long-range shooting isn't something you rush into. Marcus had expected as much. How much time do you need? Give me an hour to assess the range and conditions. Then we can set up the demonstration for the group. While the other recruits worked on standard exercises at closer ranges, Elena and Marcus drove to the extended facility. The range stretched across a wide valley, with target positions marked at various distances out to 2,500 meters. The terrain was more challenging than the standard range, with elevation changes and natural obstacles that would affect bullet flight. Elena spent the first 30 minutes simply observing. She used a rangefinder to confirm distances, checked wind patterns with a handheld weather meter, and made extensive notes about temperature and humidity. Marcus watched her process, impressed by the scientific approach she took to every aspect of the shot. The conditions are actually quite good, Elena finally said. Wind is consistent, temperature is stable, and visibility is excellent. The main challenge will be the elevation change between the firing position and the target. How do you account for that? Shooting uphill or downhill changes the effective distance of the shot. You have to calculate the horizontal distance rather than the actual line of sight distance. At 1,500 meters with the elevation change we have here, the effective distance is probably closer to 1,400 meters. Elena began setting up her rifle, making precise adjustments to the scope and checking every component of her equipment. Marcus noticed that her rifle was significantly more sophisticated than the standard sniper systems he was familiar with. Is that your personal weapon? Marcus asked. It's a custom-built system optimized for extreme range shooting. The rifle, scope, ammunition, everything is matched to work together at long distances. What kind of accuracy can you expect at 1,500 meters? Under these conditions with this equipment, I should be able to keep all shots within a 10-inch circle. That's assuming I do my job correctly. 10 inches at 1,500 meters was remarkable precision. Marcus had seen military snipers who would be happy with twice that group size at half the distance. Elena finished her setup and took a prone position behind the rifle. She spent several minutes simply observing through the scope, studying the target and the conditions between her position and the impact point. "I'm ready when you want to bring the group over," she said. Marcus radioed for the other recruits to join them at the extended range. When they arrived, several of them whistled in appreciation at the distance to the target. "Today you're going to see something special," Marcus announced. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez is going to demonstrate precision shooting at 1,500 meters. This is well beyond the range most of you will ever encounter, but it's important to understand what's possible with advanced training and equipment." The recruits gathered behind Elena's position, maintaining a safe distance but close enough to observe her technique. Marcus explained the basics of long-range shooting as Elena made her final preparations. "At this distance, the bullet will be in flight for approximately 3 seconds, Marcus said. "The shooter has to account for wind, elevation, temperature, even the rotation of the earth. It's as much physics as marksmanship." Elena settled into her final shooting position and began her breathing routine. Marcus could see her enter the focused state that serious shooters achieved when everything else faded away, except the shot. "Firing," Elena called out softly. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. Everyone watched through binoculars as the bullet traced its path toward the distant target. 3 seconds later, they saw the impact marker appear on the target. "Hit. Center ring," one of the recruits called out, amazement clear in his voice. Elena remained in position, cycling the bolt and preparing for a second shot. She fired 4 more rounds in steady succession, each shot following the same careful process. When she finished, Marcus called the range safe and they drove down to examine the target. All 5 shots had impacted within a circle smaller than the diameter of a dinner plate. The precision was extraordinary by any standard. "How is that even possible?" one of the recruits asked. Elena stood up from checking the target and faced the group. "It's possible because of practice, proper equipment, and understanding the science behind what happens when a bullet travels that distance. Every variable matters at long range. How long did it take you to develop this level of skill?" another recruit asked. "Years of dedicated practice," Elena replied. "Thousands of rounds fired under all kinds of conditions. You have to understand your equipment completely and be able to make accurate calculations under pressure." Marcus watched the recruits process what they had witnessed. Most of them had probably never imagined that this level of precision was achievable. "The key thing to understand," Elena continued, "is that this kind of shooting is built on the same fundamentals you're learning now. Proper breathing, trigger control, consistent position, follow-through. Distance doesn't change the basics, it just makes every small error more obvious." As they packed up the equipment and headed back to the main facility, Marcus reflected on what the demonstration had accomplished. The recruits had seen something that would probably influence their approach to marksmanship for the rest of their careers. But more importantly, they had learned that extraordinary achievement was built on mastery of fundamental skills. Elena had once again shown her ability to perform at an exceptional level while maintaining the humble perspective that made her such an effective teacher. She had shared her expertise without making others feel inadequate, and had emphasized the importance of consistent practice and attention to detail. That afternoon, Marcus noticed a change in how the recruits approached their shooting. They paid more attention to their breathing, took more time with their sight picture, and showed greater focus during each exercise. Elena's demonstration had raised their standards and shown them what was possible with dedication to their craft. Over the following days, Marcus found himself looking forward to his conversations with Elena more than the actual training sessions. Her unique perspective on marksmanship, combined with her extensive combat experience, offered insights that went far beyond standard military doctrine. During one of their evening discussions, Marcus asked about the mental aspects of extreme-range shooting. "How do you handle the psychological pressure of knowing that one shot could determine the outcome of an entire mission?" Elena was cleaning her rifle, as had become her routine after each day's training. The pressure isn't really about the shot itself, she said. It's about the preparation. If you've done everything correctly in the lead up to the moment, the shot becomes almost inevitable. What do you mean by everything correctly? Intelligence gathering, equipment preparation, environmental assessment, positioning. By the time you're ready to fire, you've already made dozens of decisions that determine success or failure. The actual trigger pull is just the final step in a long process. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand why Elena approached shooting with such systematic precision. It's like building a house. Every foundation element has to be perfect or the whole structure fails. That's exactly right. In combat, you don't get second chances. Either you've prepared correctly and the shot succeeds, or you haven't and people die. The weight of that responsibility was something Marcus hadn't fully appreciated before meeting Elena. In his role as an instructor, accuracy was important, but the stakes were never life or death. Elena operated in an environment where a small mistake could have catastrophic consequences. How do you deal with that level of responsibility? Elena paused in her cleaning and looked at Marcus directly. You accept it completely, not just the responsibility for success, but also the responsibility for failure. When you pull that trigger, you own everything that happens next. Have you ever missed a critical shot? Yes. Elena's answer was immediate and honest. Early in my deployment, I had an opportunity to eliminate a target who was coordinating attacks on supply convoys. The conditions were challenging, and I let the difficulty affect my confidence. I second-guessed my calculations and adjusted my aim at the last moment. What happened? I missed. Not by much, maybe 6 inches, but at that range, 6 inches might as well be 6 feet. The target escaped, and 3 days later, one of those supply convoys was hit. 2 soldiers died in that attack. Marcus could see the pain in Elena's eyes as she recounted the story. That must have been devastating. It was a learning experience. I realized that doubt is more dangerous than any environmental factor. If you don't trust your preparation and your skills completely, you've already failed before you pull the trigger. How did you recover from that? I analyzed everything that went wrong, identified the specific mistakes I made, and made sure I never repeated them. Then I requested additional training opportunities to rebuild my confidence. Elena resumed cleaning her rifle with renewed focus. The next time I had a similar shot opportunity, I trusted my preparation completely. That was the 3,200-meter shot I told you about. Marcus was struck by Elena's ability to learn from failure and use it to improve her performance. Most people would have been crushed by the knowledge that their mistake had contributed to casualties. Elena had used it as motivation to become better. Do you think natural talent or training is more important for long-range shooting? Training without question. Natural ability might help you get started, but precision at extreme ranges requires knowledge and skills that can only be developed through dedicated practice. What about intuition? Do you ever just feel when a shot is right? Elena smiled slightly. What people call intuition is usually just pattern recognition based on experience. After thousands of shots under various conditions, you start to recognize subtle cues that indicate when everything is aligned correctly. Can that kind of recognition be taught? To some degree, yes, but it requires exposure to many different shooting scenarios. Most people practice under similar conditions repeatedly, so they never develop the full range of pattern recognition. Marcus thought about his own teaching methods. Most of his instruction took place under controlled conditions at a standardized range. Elena's experience suggested that truly advanced marksmanship required much more varied practice. What advice would you give to someone who wants to develop serious long-range shooting skills? Start with perfect fundamentals and never compromise on them no matter what. Then gradually increase distance and difficulty while maintaining those fundamentals. Most importantly, practice under as many different conditions as possible. Different conditions meaning weather and terrain. Weather, terrain, time of day, stress levels, physical positions, target types. Every variable you might encounter in real situations. The goal is to eliminate surprises by having experience with every possible scenario. Elena finished her cleaning routine and began packing her equipment. The other crucial element is honest self-assessment. You have to be willing to acknowledge your limitations and work systematically to overcome them. That sounds like it requires a lot of humility. Humility keeps you alive. Overconfidence kills you and the people depending on you. As they walked toward the parking area, Marcus reflected on how much his understanding of marksmanship had evolved over the past few days. Elena had shown him that truly advanced shooting, was as much about mental discipline and systematic preparation as it was about physical skill. Elena, I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge with me. This has been incredibly educational. Thank you for being open to learning, Sergeant. Most instructors think they already know everything they need to know. What made you willing to share so much with me? Elena stopped and considered the question. Because I can see that you genuinely care about helping people become better shooters. That's rare. Most people are more interested in showing off their own abilities than in actually teaching others. I've learned more from you in a few days than I learned in years of standard training. That's because you asked the right questions. Most people want to know about equipment or techniques. You asked about the mental aspects and the decision-making process. Those are the elements that really matter at advanced levels. Marcus realized that Elena had been evaluating him just as carefully as he had been learning from her. She had shared her knowledge because she recognized someone who would use it responsibly. Would you be willing to help me develop a more advanced curriculum for future classes? Elena paused at her vehicle and looked back at Marcus. I'd be interested in that conversation. But remember, most students aren't ready for the kind of training that develops extreme range capabilities. You have to build the foundation first. What would that foundation look like? Perfect execution of fundamentals under increasingly challenging conditions. Mental discipline training. Systematic approach to problem solving. Most importantly, understanding that marksmanship is a tool to serve something larger than yourself. As Elena drove away, Marcus stood in the parking lot thinking about their conversation. He realized that meeting her had changed not just his understanding of shooting, but his entire approach to instruction. She had shown him that true expertise wasn't just about technical knowledge, but about the wisdom to use that knowledge responsibly. The next morning, Marcus found himself looking at his standard curriculum with new eyes. The exercises seemed limited, focused more on meeting minimum standards than on developing real capability. He began sketching out ideas for more comprehensive training that would incorporate Elena's insights about mental preparation and systematic skill development. When Elena arrived for the day's session, Marcus shared his thoughts with her. I've been thinking about what you said regarding building proper foundations. How would you structure a program to develop serious long-range capabilities? Start with perfect execution at close range, Elena replied immediately. Most people want to shoot far before they can shoot well. Master consistency at 100 meters before attempting 300. Master 300 before attempting 600. How do you define mastery at each level? The ability to perform consistently under various conditions and stress factors. Weather changes, time pressure, physical discomfort, emotional stress. If you can only shoot well under perfect conditions, you haven't really mastered anything. Elena pulled out a small notebook and began sketching a training progression. Each level should introduce new variables, while maintaining all the previous standards. By the time someone is ready for extreme range shooting, they should be able to perform under any conditions they might encounter. Marcus studied her notes, impressed by the systematic approach. This looks like it would take years to complete. It does. Real expertise can't be rushed. Most people aren't willing to invest that kind of time and effort, which is why there are so few truly capable long-range shooters. But for those who are willing, Elena smiled. For those who are willing to do the work, the possibilities are extraordinary. You can develop capabilities that most people consider impossible. As the day's training session began, Marcus implemented some of Elena's suggestions. He introduced stress factors and varying conditions that challenged the recruits to maintain their fundamentals under pressure. The results were immediately apparent. Some struggled with the added difficulty, but others rose to meet the challenge. Elena worked individually with several of the recruits, offering specific guidance based on her observations of their technique. Marcus watched her teaching style, noting how she emphasized understanding over rote execution. Why are you making that adjustment to your breathing pattern? Elena asked one recruit. Because that's how I was taught, the soldier replied. But do you understand why that technique works? What's the physiological basis for the timing? The recruit admitted he didn't know. Elena spent the next few minutes explaining the relationship between breathing, heart rate, and muscle tension, helping him understand the science behind the technique. When you understand why something works, you can adapt it to different situations, Elena explained. When you just memorize steps, you're limited to situations identical to your training. Marcus realized this was another key insight into Elena's approach. She didn't just teach techniques. She taught understanding. That deeper knowledge was what enabled her to perform under the extreme conditions she had faced in combat. During lunch, one of the recruits approached Elena with a question that had been bothering him since her long-range demonstration. "Staff Sergeant, how do you deal with knowing that your shooting might kill someone?" Elena's expression became serious. "That's an important question, and it deserves an honest answer. Every sniper has to come to terms with the reality of what we do." She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "The way I think about it is this. My job is to protect people who can't protect themselves. When I take a shot, it's because that action will save more lives than it costs. But how can you be certain of that? You can't always be certain. That's why the decision to engage a target is never taken lightly. Intelligence has to be solid, the threat has to be real, and there has to be no alternative that would achieve the same result with less risk." Elena looked at each of the recruits gathered around her. The responsibility is enormous, and it should feel enormous. The moment it becomes easy to make that decision is the moment you should find a different job. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Elena addressing questions about rules of engagement, ethical considerations, and the psychological impact of combat operations. Marcus was impressed by her thoughtful approach to these difficult topics. As the afternoon training session concluded, Marcus realized that Elena had accomplished something remarkable over the past few days. She had not only demonstrated extraordinary technical skill, but had also shared the wisdom and perspective that made such skill meaningful. The recruits were leaving with a much deeper understanding of what it meant to be a professional marksman. On the final day of the training course, Marcus arrived at the range to find Elena already there, as had become her habit. But this morning was different. She had set up multiple rifles and was systematically testing each one at various distances. "What's all this?" Marcus asked, gesturing at the impressive array of weapons and equipment. "I wanted to demonstrate something for you and the recruits," Elena replied. "One of the most important lessons about precision shooting that most people never learn. Which is that the shooter is more important than the equipment." Elena pointed to the rifles she had arranged. "These range from a basic military sniper system to some of the most advanced custom rifles available. The price difference between the cheapest and most expensive is probably $50,000. Marcus whistled at the figure. "That's more than most people make in a year." "Exactly. And here's what I want to show you." Elena picked up the most basic rifle in the lineup. This is a standard military sniper rifle, probably 20 years old, with basic optics and no custom modifications. She moved to a firing position and engaged targets at 400, 600, and 800 meters with the older weapon. Her groupings were tight and consistent, clearly demonstrating professional-level accuracy. "Now watch what happens with the most expensive rifle in the group," Elena said, switching to an obviously sophisticated custom weapon with advanced optics and numerous modifications. She repeated the same course of fire at the same distances. The groups were slightly smaller but not dramatically different from what she had achieved with the basic rifle. "The difference is maybe 20%, Elena explained as they examined the targets. 20% improvement for equipment that costs 20 times as much. What's the point of the demonstration? To show that skill matters far more than equipment. A mediocre shooter with the best rifle in the world will never outperform an expert shooter with basic equipment." As the recruits arrived and gathered around, Elena explained what she had demonstrated. "Too many people think that buying better equipment will automatically make them better shooters. That's backwards thinking." One of the recruits raised his hand. "But doesn't better equipment help at all?" "Of course it helps," Elena replied. "But only if you already have the skills to take advantage of it. Give a beginner a $1 million rifle, and they'll still shoot like a beginner." She pointed to the targets showing her results with different rifles. "The equipment can give you a small edge, but fundamental skills give you a huge advantage. Master your fundamentals first, then worry about upgrading your equipment." Marcus realized this was another example of Elena's systematic approach to everything. She identified the most important elements first, and focused on those before moving to less critical factors. "What would you say is the most important piece of equipment for a sniper?" Marcus asked. Elena tapped her temple. Everything else is just tools. Your mind is what processes information, makes calculations, controls emotions, and executes decisions. No piece of equipment can do that for you." The morning's final exercise involved each recruit shooting the same course of fire with their personal weapon, and then with one of Elena's rifles. The results clearly supported her point. Each person's groupings improved slightly with the better equipment, but their relative ranking remained almost identical. After lunch, Marcus gathered the group for a final discussion session. Before we conclude this training, I want each of you to share one thing you learned this week that will change how you approach marksmanship. The responses revealed how much Elena's presence had influenced the entire group. They talked about the importance of mental preparation, systematic skill development, understanding the science behind their techniques, and maintaining humble confidence in their abilities. When it was Elena's turn to speak, she stood and faced the group. What I want to leave you with is this. Marksmanship is a craft that demands lifelong learning. The moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop improving. She paused and looked at each recruit individually. But more importantly, remember that these skills exist to serve something larger than yourself. Whether you're protecting your fellow soldiers, defending civilians, or serving your country, your abilities are a tool to help others. Every shot you take in training should be preparation for a moment when it really matters. Practice like lives depend on it because someday they might. After the formal conclusion of the course, Elena began packing her equipment while the recruits gradually departed. Marcus helped her carry gear to her vehicle, reflecting on the remarkable week they had shared. Elena, I have to ask, why did you really agree to help with this course? Someone with your background could probably get any assignment you wanted. Elena finished loading her rifle cases and turned to face Marcus. Because teaching is how knowledge survives. Everything I've learned, all the experience I've gained, dies with me unless I pass it on to others. But why choose a basic marksmanship course? Because that's where it starts. Advanced skills are built on fundamental knowledge. If I can help even one person develop the right foundation, they might go on to save lives with that knowledge. Marcus nodded, understanding. It's about legacy. Exactly. My longest shot might be remembered as a number, but the people I teach will carry the real lessons forward. As Elena prepared to leave, Marcus made a request. Would you be willing to come back and help with future courses? This has been the most valuable training I've ever been involved with. Elena smiled. I'd be honored to help. But remember what I taught you about building foundations. Don't try to turn every student into a long-range specialist. Focus on making them excellent at the basics first. I understand. Master the fundamentals before attempting advanced techniques. And remember that the mental aspects are just as important as the physical skills. Discipline, patience, systematic thinking, emotional control. Those qualities make the difference between good shooters and great ones. They shook hands, and Elena drove away, leaving Marcus alone at the range where everything had started just a week earlier. He looked out at the targets they had used for training, thinking about all the lessons Elena had shared. Over the following months, Marcus completely redesigned his training curriculum based on Elena's insights. He incorporated stress factors, variable conditions, mental preparation exercises, and systematic skill progression. The results were dramatic. His students began achieving levels of accuracy and consistency that exceeded anything he had seen in previous courses. More importantly, they developed the professional mindset that Elena had demonstrated. They understood that marksmanship was a serious responsibility, requiring dedication, humility, and constant improvement. A year later, Marcus received a message from one of the recruits who had been in Elena's class. He was writing from Afghanistan, where he had successfully completed sniper school and was serving with distinction in a combat unit. Sergeant Chen, the message read, I wanted you to know that everything Staff Sergeant Rodriguez taught us has proven invaluable in real operations. Her emphasis on fundamentals and mental preparation has made the difference in several critical situations. Please thank her for me if you're still in contact. Marcus smiled as he read the message. Elena's legacy was already spreading, carried forward by the people she had influenced during that remarkable week of training. He forwarded the message to Elena, along with a note of his own. This is exactly what you were talking about when you mentioned how knowledge survives. Thank you for showing all of us what it means to be a true professional. Elena's reply was characteristically brief but meaningful. This is why we teach. Every student who goes on to serve with distinction carries part of that lesson forward. The real impact is multiplied through all the people. They'll influence in turn. Marcus printed out both messages, and kept them in his office as a reminder of the week that had changed his entire approach to instruction. Elena Rodriguez had walked past her rifle without a word that first morning, but her 3,200-meter record had been just the beginning of an education that transformed everyone she touched. The true measure of her expertise wasn't the distance of her longest shot, but the depth of understanding she shared with others and the legacy of excellence she helped create in every person she taught.